Welcome back, everybody. John Aravosis here. This is the Aravosis Report, your nightly show talking about the latest news from Ukraine, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. How's everybody doing? Woo-woo! It's Wednesday, January 18th. Let me get TickTock rolling here and introduce yourselves, if you would, while we are waiting. Lots of interesting, well, I mean, it's always interesting, but I think tonight's particularly interesting news tonight. So we shall delve into it momentarily. Hello, TikTokers. Welcome, welcome. Anyway, Newfoundland, which I believe that's how you pronounce it. I was taught years ago from somebody I had met skiing who was from there. Crazy guy. Amazing skier. Hey, TikTokers, you are here. Excellent. Hello from the Senate. No, hello, Senate. How are you? Winnipeg, lots of Canadians tonight. Woo woo! Oh, Jingle, I didn't remember you were from Canada. Maybe I don't know if I remember if I knew that. York, I'm going to guess York, England. What else is going on, guys? We'll wait a minute. As always, I like to wait a minute just for folks to arrive. Yep, Yasu Gus. We'll get there in a second here, usually about half a minute. So we'll wait another half minute. I got a headache today. I ate late this morning, which is bad. And I get headaches when I eat late. So I am dealing with that, but I'll live. Anyway. Oh, la, 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 la. All right. Almost there. Almost there. Thank you for the gift, Al. I appreciate that. All right. I'll start the introductions. So, hey, everybody, welcome, welcome. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report, a nightly show looking at the latest news from Ukraine. First half of the show, as you guys know who are regulars, I talk about the latest news. And then the second half of the show, I take your guys' questions, your comments, and we discuss the news. The way this works is on TikTok, you can submit your questions via the Q&A link that's in my profile. Feel free to use it now if you want, because I'll get to them eventually. And on YouTube, obviously, and the other services, use the box at the bottom of the screen. I always say, if you guys can help out with gifts on TikTok and with super chat questions and super stickers on YouTube, I appreciate it. I do this full time. Nobody is paying me other than you all. So I take the gifts and basically all the gifts you guys give me are what's helping pay the bills. So I very much appreciate it. And I'd like that to keep coming. So thank you very much. Let me get rolling. So lots of interesting news today. Thank you, Allie, by the way, for the gift there on TikTok. So a Wall Street Journal story just broke before the show saying that Germany isn't going to allow allies in Europe to ship German tanks to Ukraine until and unless the U.S. ships U.S. Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Now, real quick, thank you to Diehard Cowboy. And there was another one there. Who's the other one? There was the TikTok gun from David Hannum. Thank you, David, for that. Oh God, I don't even know where to start with this. I've got, I'll read in a little bit the next story. There were some decent quotes coming from German Chancellor Scholz today in Davos, Switzerland. And it looked like Scholz was maybe even signaling that he was going to go ahead and approve the tanks. Now, just to remind everybody what we're talking about, okay? Germany produces the Leopard 2 tank, which is a state-of-the-art, very good tank, on par with the American Abrams tank. But what makes it so desirable is a couple things. One, it has been produced in large numbers and has been sold across Europe. So there are, I believe, 13 European countries that use the German tanks. That means there is a good-sized pool of tanks that can be sent to Ukraine by the various countries. Thank you, Dan, for that. By the various countries. Thank you, Benji. And it basically makes it easier to make the tanks available, right? If the tanks were only coming from one country, then you've got to count and say, okay, how many tanks are coming from that country? Thank you, blah, blah, and Benji both. Meaning I was trying to do the thanks to the gifts and also keep explaining here. If one country is only providing tanks, like the U.S. providing Abrams tanks, for example, if it's only coming from the U.S., then the U.S. has got to be paying attention to, okay, how many tanks am I giving away, right? How many do I still have for security? When it's spread around 13 countries, for example, 13 countries have not offered the tanks. So far, we've had Poland and Finland, but we assume others would. When you spread it around more countries, each country can give fewer tanks, right? Ukraine, for example, needs 100 to 200 tanks, basically. Well, if it's one country providing it, that's 200 tanks one country's providing. If you spread it around 13 countries, that's what, 8 tanks, something like that? 8 tanks per country. That makes it, no, I'm sorry, 16 tanks. I'm getting confused here. 16 tanks a country. Still, that's a heck of a lot easier for a country to provide than 200 tanks. The issue here is, and I don't know what to think about this. I have to say, the Germans are pissing me off. I was tweeting about this earlier today. There certainly is this feeling of, it's funny. Americans, thank you, Andrew, for that. Americans have this really awful image of France. The funny part with Americans and France, I mean, I don't. I love France. I studied in France. But a lot of Americans, they love France. They want to go to France, right? Thank you, B. Smith. But they also think of the French as kind of, what do they call them? What's the, thank you, Jesse James, for the gift there. I forget the word. What was the cheese surrender monkeys, cheese eating surrender monkeys or whatever it is? Basically the idea that the French are always willing to cave, that the French are always wanting to appease. And at the beginning of the war, a lot of us had that fear, right? We were afraid that President Macron of France was basically being a little too friendly to Vladimir Putin. That role has been taken over by the Germans almost from the beginning. I don't want to get into too much of a non-Ukraine discussion, but it worries me because Germany is often talked about as, the power of Europe, especially with the Brits pulling out of the European Union, right? Brexit. It left Germany and France, but really Germany as the big power. And I fear that Germany is, God, at least America's nightmare of what Europe could be, which is basically always wanting to kind of do things halfway, wanting to appease the Russians, wanting to appease the bad guys, and kind of doing good stuff, but then turning around and wanting to appease. And this stereotypical image that some Americans have of Europe, right? And again, Americans can also be a little more warmongering too. I mean, Americans, I think we may be too prone to using our military sometimes. It's possible, but there also is this fear that the Europeans sometimes aren't willing enough to stand up for what's right. And the Germans. Okay, so anyway, so what's going on is the Wall Street Journal says that Germany is apparently refusing to provide its tanks, its Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, and mind you, is refusing to let any other country provide that country's Leopard 2 tanks that it bought from Germany to Ukraine until America provides somewhere, and I wrote this down, what was the number they put? Somewhere between 5 and 10 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Now, the Americans claim that this is not an issue of America being worried about, escalation, right? And that's actually a big story I'm going to talk about in a second, is this idea that the U.S. has always been worried that, if we give too good of weapons to Ukraine, Putin will get mad and use nukes, whatever. Well, the Americans are saying that's not really the problem with providing Abrams tanks. We're not afraid of Putin getting mad. What we're afraid of, the government says, and, you'd really have to, generally speaking, I have seen people back up this argument. I did just see Carl Bildt, who was the former Swedish prime minister. I think he was prime minister as well. He was defense minister he was a foreign minister, but I think he was prime minister as well in the 90s. But Bildt came and said he thinks the Americans are wrong about this. The Americans are saying that the Abrams tank that we have takes too much fuel, like way too much fuel, a horrific amount that the Ukrainians would have to provide, way more than other tanks. It literally has a jet engine in the tank. I mean, that's how much fuel this thing uses. It's a horrific amount. 2, they're very difficult tanks to maintain. And we would not only have to, train the Ukrainians in using a very difficult tank and maintaining a very difficult tank, but of course it means providing the parts they need to maintain the tanks. The German Leopard tank, which is the closest European tank to the Abrams, apparently is better in both of those regards. Another problem you get in providing Leopards and Abrams is it is way more efficient for the Ukrainians to have one kind of tank rather than 2 kinds of tank. Each tank needs to have spare parts. Each tank, and those parts are going to be unique to each tank, right? It's not like Abrams parts can be used in Leopards and stuff like this, right? Each tank will have spare parts. Each tank will have a different operation. So you have to have different crews trained on how to use each different tank. What was the other? The ammunition. The ammunition is different for each tank as well, right? Any case, I'm willing to leave a scintilla of doubt here that maybe the Germans have a point, maybe, but I gotta tell you, I hear this story and it pisses me off. It just pisses me off because we have been seeing this from day one with the Germans. And I'm sorry, thank you, Combat, with the hat there. We keep seeing a, push me, pull you. Like, it's like, it's like a little kid when like your whole, or my dog. It's my dog. My dog, Sasha, has the little ball in her mouth and she drops it on the ground. And every time I try to pick the ball up, she grabs it and pulls back. And she loves the game. She loves the game. But it's Charlie Brown in the football, the same thing. And I feel like Germany is my dog with the ball in her mouth. And every time I go for the ball, she goes, I just like, there's just, oh my God. In any case, so that's what's going on with Germany. I just, God. And by the way, I'm not at all, thank you, Gretchen. I'm not at all convinced either that if the US provided 5 to 10 Abrams tanks, that Germany would actually turn around and say, okay, we'll let everybody send their Leopard tanks to Ukraine. I just don't believe it. I'm getting really tired of this, I've got to say. And by the way, if I were Vladimir Putin, I would be just rubbing my hand. I'd be salivating right now if I were Vladimir Putin. Thank you, Mark Jess, for the hat there. Putin's looking at this and going, this is freaking great. Germany is signaling that Germany is not, that there is a rift between Germany and America on giving weapons, and that the Germans, just like the Turks, are really not willing to go along here. In any case, really pissing me off. Now, I was going to read really quick. There were some quotes from Scholz, the German chancellor, earlier today at Davos. One quote that was really good and one that was not so good. Earlier today, he said, in order for the war to end, Russia must lose. That's why we supply weapons to Ukraine in close communication with our partners. Now, I read that and I was like, what a great quote. Biden, and I've said this before, and I challenge you all to go Google this. Biden has never said Russia must lose. Biden does not say that. Biden always says Ukraine must not lose and Russia must not win. He never says Russia must lose or Ukraine must win. What's the difference? I always point this out. The difference is Russia must not win and Ukraine must not lose is the way you, if you're being crafty in saying that, it's the way you describe a tie, a stalemate. If you have a stalemate and both countries are fighting but neither can win, if that were your goal, you could say, I don't want Russia to win and I don't want Ukraine to lose. ... Therefore, I'm going to supply just enough weapons so they can fight each other and but neither can win and they both get tired. For Scholz to say Russia must lose is a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I think it's great. And again, Biden won't say that. But then Scholz also says at Davos today, he's asked about the deal with the Leopard tanks. And he says, let me see this real quick. He responds by saying Germany has been among the biggest supporters of Ukraine. Okay. We want, and then listen to this. We want to avoid this becoming a war between Russia and NATO. Where the hell did that come from? I mean, that's the kind of peacenik talk that we were hearing at the beginning of the war. And frankly, we were hearing a lot of it from Biden. I mean, I blame Biden for this one. Biden was the one constantly talking about World War III. It's going to be World War III if we help the Ukrainians. No one's really been talking about the World War III BS for a while now. For the German chancellor, today of all days, when we are 2 days away from supposedly him making a decision on whether or not he's going to provide the tanks, to sit there and say that when NATO is considering how much we're going to help Ukraine fight back against Russia, to give the answer, hey, we're going to help Ukraine, but we don't want, what was the word here? We don't want a war between Russia and NATO. If I'm Vladimir Putin and I hear that, I go, this is freaking great. I need to do everything possible to convince the Americans and the Germans especially that it's going to be war with NATO, that I'm going to war with NATO if they help Ukraine, right? All you're doing is telling Putin what to do, signaling to Putin that the Germans are still worried about. It just drives me crazy. Thank you, Annie, for that. A quick little, actually, I'm going to continue with it. Actually, a better story from, what was it, the New York Times, I think? A better story from the New York Times that just came out an hour or two ago as well, that America may be warming up to the idea of Ukraine taking back Crimea. I've been talking about that all week as well. But first, I want to show you something. I've got a Discord. It's discord.aravosis.com. And it's an online community. It's kind of hard to explain what Discord is until you check it out, but you guys can check it out. But one of the things we've been doing on the Discord has been selling things. Pretty much everything we've been auctioning so far on the Discord have been items we've gotten from Ukraine. And the most recent item we got from Ukraine that I just got today, and I just put it up for auction for our Discord VIP members, is this. This is a box containing, and I will show you, 2 pieces of a downed Russian fighter jet, downed over Kharkiv, Ukraine. Totally, from my taste, totally freaking cool. Very excited about this. It was not cheap because it was a charity in Ukraine that, we're doing 2 pieces because I'm grabbing 1 piece out of each, but thank you for being difficult, Klaus. So what we're doing with these is they were not cheap. So we had to pay a decent amount for each. Actually, we had to pay $200 for each one because basically you had to give to the charity. And if you gave $200 to the charity, they would give you the airplane parts. And again, they come in a nice little box. The other cute thing about this, and I'm going to continue with the news, but the other cute thing is they call it Orc Busters. And it's cute because the Ukrainians are kind of into the anime thing. It's kind of funny. But Orc Busters, and they include the coordinates for where it crashed, where it was shot down. They include, the picture of the downed Russian plane. It's really pretty cool. And then a little code where you can find out more. Anyway, it's very cool. But the first one, I've only got a few of these. The first one is going up, like I said, for our VIP members who are the paying members of the Discord. And then after that, there will also be I will do one for the public as well, but first I wanted to do for the VIP members. So go check out the Discord. But it's very cool. I'm very excited. The thing is, it depends on your taste. To me, this is the Christmas gift that I want. But some people, it's not their cup of tea. All I can say about the veracity of it, my friend Vlad, who has been my colleague on all of the fundraisers we've been doing all year, we've raised over $80,000 for Ukraine. And Vlad knows the people who are running this charity, who were able to get their hands on the Russian jet, and Vlad says they're for real. That is the authenticity I can give you. There is no way for me to test this and tell you whatever, but we do know the people who provided it. Vlad knows the people running the group and said, I trust them. Let's get it. So there you go. Any case, all right, let's keep going here. So New York, anyway, it's discord.aravosis.com. So to New York Times, this is an interesting story. So New York Times has a story out today saying the United States is warming to the notion that that Ukraine maybe should start going after Crimea. The deal with Crimea is this, okay? Handy dandy map. You've got in 2014, Russia's war on Ukraine, I should say, started in 2014. It didn't start last year. The Russians invaded and stole Crimea, this territory in the south of Ukraine, okay? And then they annexed it. They claimed it's now Russia, right? So the last several years, they've been claiming it's Russia. It's not Russia, it's Ukraine, but whatever. Well, then the Russians invade last February, and the Russians end up occupying all of this territory, right? And now they're claiming all of this territory is Russian territory as well. It's not. Thank you, Inspired Woman, for the cheerleaders for this. What America, I think, till now, and I've been saying this to you guys repeatedly, and I think this article pretty much backs me up, that the U.S. and probably the Europeans too certainly the French and the Germans, I'll bet you, have been okay with Ukraine getting back this territory from the Russians. But when it comes to Crimea, they've been freaking out. We have been the whole time going, it's different with Crimea because Crimea is very important to the Russians, and Putin considers it his big victory that he got Crimea from the Ukrainians. And sure, if the Ukrainians take back the territory Putin took last year, that's not as big a deal. But if the Ukrainians try to take back Crimea, oh my God, Putin will get so upset he'll use nuclear weapons, etc. I think that is a big part of the reason that I would say America overall has not been Europe overall, America and the Allies have not been as helpful as they could be as far as some of the weapons we've been providing Ukraine. I think it's two things. One, there has been an overall fear that the Russians will perceive any weapons we give Ukraine that are better than what they're currently getting as an escalation, and the Russians might use nukes, right? That's been the overall fear in general. And the second fear has been particularly with regards to Crimea, right? Well, what the New York Times is saying today, quick sip of water and we'll continue. I will read you the quote. After months of discussions with Ukrainian officials, the Biden administration is finally starting to concede that Kyiv may need the power to strike the Russian sanctuary, meaning Crimea, even if such a move increases the risk of escalation, according to several U.S. officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity. The moderation in position has come about as the Biden administration has come to believe that if the Ukrainian military can show Russia that its control of Crimea can be threatened, that would strengthen Kyiv's position in any future negotiations. In addition, fears that the Kremlin would retaliate using a tactical nuclear weapon have dimmed, U.S. officials and experts said, though they cautioned the risk remained. So two things are going on here. One, and this is a point I've been raising for a couple of weeks with you guys, is Russia still wants to take all of Ukraine, okay? I mean, Russia does not want to negotiate. Russia thinks it can win the war, right? And therefore there's no desire, and even if Russia were negotiating, it wouldn't be sincere, okay? Russia wants to win this war. Russia wants to take all of Ukraine. Well, go back to what I was saying at the beginning of the show, right? If Biden's position on this, and I think as Biden does, much of Europe will do, if Biden's position is, one, we don't want Ukraine to win, but we don't want Ukraine to lose because we're afraid of nuclear war and all this. But we also don't want Ukraine to lose because we don't want Russia to win. We don't want Russia to lose completely because they might use their nukes, but we don't want Russia to actually win. If that's your position, then Biden kind of wants a stalemate in essence, and he wants both Ukraine and Russia to basically get tired of each other and both sides to say, okay, we can't keep doing this. We've got to negotiate. I think that's what's happening in Biden's head. In this case, what Biden is now worried about is that Russia does not see this as a stalemate. Russia sees this as, hey, so we've lost 100,000 troops. We don't care. We're happy to lose 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 men. We don't care, right? That Russia's saying we'll be at war for years if we have to. We want to take all of Ukraine. If that's Russia's position, then Biden's strategy has failed, right? Russia is not in any danger from Russia's position of coming to a conclusion that they can't win this and they've got to negotiate. So now the U.S. has to do something to shake things up. They've got to do something to try to convince Russia that Russia can't win the war because Russia still thinks it can win the war. And that means giving Ukraine even better weapons. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is, and we talked about this last night, actually, somebody had asked some questions. Was it PB&J? I'm forgetting who asked the question yesterday, but maybe it was Ben. But we were saying, the issue of as every time the U.S. and NATO overall gives Ukraine better weapons and the Russians don't go nuclear, isn't that starting to send the message that the Russians are bluffing about escalation, that the Russians are bluffing when they say they're going to freak out if we give Ukraine better weapons, right? We gave Stinger missiles. Actually, the article, I think it was the New York Times article, was very interesting, or Wall Street Journal, I forget which one, but it was saying that when the U.S. first provided Stinger missiles to Ukraine, the U.S. was really paranoid about it. They didn't want anybody to know, like they were providing them secretly, to Ukraine because they were afraid Russia would get very upset, right? And now Stingers are no big deal, right? Then we provided the HIMARS, right? Remember we were giving like 1 or 2 HIMARS, and I was even complaining, going, "What do you mean 1 or 2 HIMARS?" Well, now there's 20 HIMARS, which are a wonderful rocket system that the Ukrainians have used to really, really destroy a number of Russian headquarters, causing lots of damage to the Russians. Then we get the Bradley fighting vehicles and the German Marder combat vehicles and the French light tanks. Okay, all of those in the last 3 weeks or so. What does Russia do in response? Right? Great Britain, the United Kingdom, announces that it's going to send Challenger. Are they Challenger 2 tanks? I think they're Challenger 2 as well. All these 2s, Challenger 2 tanks to Russia. What's Russia's response? I mean, Callum was telling me today that Russia's response was basically to do a cyber attack on the British Postal Service. I mean, the thing is, it's almost funny. I realize if you're British, it's a pain because it shut down all the international postal, from going, but it's kind of a joke. I mean, Russia's response, right? Russia's response to Britain providing tanks, which is a massive sort of expansion of the war in a wonderful way, right? Finally providing Western tanks is, we're going to do a cyber attack on your postal service. It's like, oh no, not that. Not the postal service, right? I mean, right? It's kind of a joke. I mean, it's an inconvenience, but it's kind of a joke, And what's good about this is clearly the Biden administration and Western countries overall, other than it seems Chancellor Scholz, who brought up the stupid argument again today, are increasingly realizing that Putin's threats of nuclear war are basically BS, that he's bluffing. So that's good. I mean, that's good. I want to see if there's anything else. I don't really have much more on the story. We're going to see where this goes. There is a new, it's funny, I'm jumping around here with the news, but it's okay. Reports of a new, thank you, Hazel, for that, of a new U.S. Arms package to Ukraine, apparently going to be huge, going to be one of our biggest ever, which is great. Thank you, Bonnie, for the gift there, which is going to be great. The aid package supposedly will not include U.S. Abrams tanks. It will include additional artillery, ammunition, and likely Stryker armored combat vehicles, which is great. But, the U.S. is still, now the one thing the U.S. is still doing, and I guess, and again, let's play devil's advocate if you're German. Does Germany have a point? Well, here's the problem, though. Germany wouldn't want to do this either, probably. The U.S., Russia is losing, Craig. The U.S. is still refusing to provide Ukraine with long-range weapons, with missiles that can go over 60 miles, basically. Currently, the missiles we've been providing for the HIMARS can go 60 miles, sort of 60 miles at the max, and 100 kilometers. Okay, so 60 miles, 100 kilometers. We have missiles for the HIMARS that can go 200 miles or 300 kilometers, which is huge, right? I mean, big difference. It would enable Ukraine to hit all of Crimea, among other things. And the reason the U.S. has been giving up until now is we're afraid Ukraine would shoot into Russia. It would allow them to hit cities in Russia and blah, 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 right? Putting aside for a moment that not only do missiles that go 60 miles, they can hit into Russia too. Because, I mean, here's Ukraine, okay? This is Ukraine's border with Russia. All of this is Ukraine's border with Russia. All Ukraine has to do is stand on the border and throw a grenade, and they have now hit Russia. It's not really hard, right? And certainly if the HIMARS go 60 miles, they can already go 60 miles, 100 kilometers. Kharkiv, all you have to do is shoot from Kharkiv. Oh, where's Kharkiv? Sorry, Kharkiv. All you have to do is shoot from Kharkiv, and you can hit into Russia. So it's kind of BS for the U.S. to be giving this argument of, oh, we're afraid of them hitting Russia. I wonder if part of what the U.S. is afraid of was the whole deal with Crimea, because giving Ukraine the longer range weapons absolutely makes it easier for the Ukrainians to to hit all of Crimea. And up until now, we've been worrying about Crimea because we've been saying, oh, if the Ukrainians hit Crimea, it'll cause Putin to use nuclear weapons, right? I'm sorry, the point I was mentioning the Germans is, the one thing I guess I can see, although I'm not sure what the Germans are afraid. I say Germans, but I mean Scholz, the chancellor. I'm not sure what he's afraid of. But sure, if Germany gives the okay for these tanks to go to Ukraine, it clearly is Germany who's going to get blamed for it. Now, it's not just the Germans. I mean, the Poles own these tanks. If the Poles give their tanks to Germany, to Ukraine, thank you, Kanowski, for that. If the Poles give their tanks to Ukraine, then the Poles are going to get blamed too, because they're Polish. I mean, they're Polish, they're German made, but they're Polish tanks. Finland wants to give its German tanks too. The tanks belong to Finland, right? Thank you, LIC, or Cool J. Oh, LL Cool J. Thank you there. But if Germany makes the decision overall and says, yes, all my children in Europe, you may all give our German-made tanks to Ukraine, Germany is taking some heat. The thing I don't quite understand is what is Germany afraid of? What is Scholz afraid of? Thank you, Timothy, for the paper crane, right? It's not like Russia's going to attack Germany. Germany's part of NATO. They're not going to attack Germany. What are they afraid of? I mean, business? I mean, is there that much German business going on with Russia right now? Is it energy? Maybe. Although Germany pretty much did a great job, and I'll give Germany credit for this though, but Germany did a great job getting off of a lot of Russian natural gas, right? I mean, is that it? And oil too. Maybe it is. Maybe it is still the energy threat. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Sorry, let me just look here. We do have a few more news stories here. A little bit more here. Oh, and I also wanted to say, I always forget to mention to you guys, please do follow me on YouTube and TikTok. Thank you, Hazel, for the train. That's very generous of you. Thank you. And very pretty. Please do follow me as well on TikTok and YouTube. I always forget to ask people to subscribe and follow. Very helpful and free for you. So please do help that way as well if you can. And please do keep the gifts coming as well. I do use your guys' gifts to pay my bills because I'm doing this full time and ain't nobody else paying me other than you folks. So I appreciate you helping out. A little bit more news. Michael Clarke, actually, I knew we did spend a lot of time on those first couple stories. Let me see. There's been more talk today. Michael Clarke, who's a British defense expert, who's on Sky News, very interesting. He was talking about, thank you, Nancy, for that. I know that's a very generous gift, and it's one of my favorites, the galaxy. I'm a big into stars and astronomy. So thank you for that. The helicopter crash, I'm going to talk about that in a second. Michael Clarke was talking about the coming spring and that the Russians will have a lot more troops in the spring. He was talking about basically the concern of there being a spring offensive. And pretty much everyone I'm seeing is talking about there being an offensive in the spring, meaning a big battle. Whether it's the Ukrainians launching the battle, whether it's the Russians launching the battle, but there's going to be a big battle. Clarke was saying that come the spring, the Russians will have a lot more troops available to fight. That's going to be, even though a lot of them aren't well trained, a lot of them don't have good supplies, they won't have good logistics. So if they're going to run out of weapons and things, but nonetheless, it's a lot more people and you can still do more with more people, even if a lot more of them are also going to get killed, which is bad. Bad if you're innocent, kind of innocent people getting drafted. He said the Ukrainians will also have more forces on the front line, and they hopefully will have a lot of new equipment. So it's going to be very interesting with this, wherever the big battle happens, whether it's Russia choosing the location for its fighting or whether it's Ukraine choosing the location, everyone seems to be coalescing around the concept that come the end of March, maybe April, there is going to be a big battle brewing between a new big front coming between Ukraine and Russia, that Russia's going to have a lot more troops. Ukraine will have more troops, but they'll have a lot more weapons, right? That's going to be a big deal because they're going to have the Bradley fighting vehicles. They're also going to have a lot more defense because at that point they should have the Patriot missile batteries. They'll have British tanks. They may even have German or American tanks by then. So he said that to him at least, that's the next thing he's looking at in terms of where the war goes from here. He is looking at what happens with this battle that that Ukraine and Russia are going to have in spring, the big battle they're going to have, because he thinks until then, not much is happening. That will be the big fight, and that could help determine the course of the war, because either Ukraine's going to come out ahead, he thinks, or Russia's going to come out ahead, and it could change everything. But he finally said we may not know the results until, I think it was June. Yeah, by June, that we may not know kind of who comes out ahead. But that's kind of the next big thing we're looking at is the spring. That's also why we're to keep talking about all of these weapons, because one thing I think it was Michael Clarke on Sky News said yesterday that I told you guys about, because the Ukrainians have to be trained on these weapons, and because the weapons just have to be shipped there, and even shipping the weapons takes time, right? And then getting the weapons, because they're typically coming via Poland, right? I think they're all coming via Poland. We fly them into Poland, or they come by land or whatever. It takes time for these weapons to get to Ukraine, and then even when they get to Ukraine, right? This is the Ukrainian border with Poland over here, right? Well, the fighting is here, and the fighting is all around here. So even when they get to the border, they've got to make their way across the country to get to the front. It takes time. And what Michael Clarke was saying is that if we have a big battle coming at the end of March, let's say, that's only a little more than 2 months away. We're already January 18th. It's going to take a good 2 months to train, at least a good 2 months, to train the Ukrainians and then get the equipment there and get it used. So that we need to make a decision this week, he said, on what kind of heavy equipment like tanks we're going to be giving the Ukrainians. And I mean, tanks, not just the Brits are sending some tanks, but they're only sending 12 or 14 or whatever. The Ukrainians need like 100 tanks, or even 200 if we really want to make a difference. The helicopter crash that was you guys may already know about this, but there was a horrific helicopter crash outside of Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, today. It killed the Ukrainian interior minister, one of his deputies, some other staff. 14 people died. Yep, the Brits, I'm sorry, Callum is saying, yep, the Brits are sending artillery as well. 30 AS-90s. I forgot to mention that, Callum. Thank you for that. And Callum was telling me earlier, those are a big deal too, because they can shoot, I guess, 50-pound warheads, or that are, in military terms, that's huge and very effective. But this helicopter crash was at a school. It crashed into a school, or in the area right outside the school. Parents were arriving with their kids. I believe 9 people were killed in the helicopter. Another 5 were killed on the ground. A kindergarten, even worse, a kindergarten. 5 people were killed on the ground. At this point, they're saying only 1 child was killed, which is, good news relatively, but 4 other people, which would include parents. Really horrific. Also, at this point, I have not seen any stories suggesting at this point that it was sabotage. I will say, boy, helicopters do go down. Hell of a coincidence if the helicopter went down on its own. And this was just literally a coincidence. It sure sounds like it would have been the Russians doing this, because let's face it, you've got the British interior minister. He's a member of Zelensky's cabinet, and yes, the Swedes are sending archers, I believe, as well. Let me see. Last thing here. Latvians are sending new military aid as well, including Stinger missiles, helicopters, machine guns with ammunition, and unmanned aerial vehicles. Oh, and then finally, Russian foreign minister, I'll end with this, but the Russian foreign minister invoked World War II and accused the U.S. of behaving like Adolf Hitler by supporting Ukraine in the war and getting Europe to support Ukraine in the war. That was the first line, was we were acting just like Hitler by doing that. And it was like, huh. He then went on and said that the U.S. was seeking, quote, listen to this, quote, a final solution to the Russia question. The final solution is the Nazi term for the plan to exterminate the Jews of Europe. This is the kind of garbage coming out of the Russians. I've said this before, their government, and this is the Soviets were the same way, decidedly unserious people, very insecure. The Soviets were super insecure as well. Interesting combination. An incredible inferiority complex mixed with incredible superiority complex, right? The Russians think they're the best thing since sliced bread, and they also think not a single person recognizes that they're the best thing since sliced bread, which is so interesting, right? That basically, they're so good, but nobody knows they're so good. It's a very weird mix, but this kind of stuff, I think it's insecure and paranoid, but it's mixed with megalomania. It's insecure, paranoid megalomania. And I just find that such a weird thing. It's a very weird country. I mean, it really, as far as this kind of government attitude, it's very, anyway, it worries me because they're not Europeans. They're not Europeans. I mean, and we are dealing with people who think differently. I mean, with the government, clearly they think differently than we do, but you have to stand up to them. All right, let's keep going here. So, Patreon too. I forgot to mention, I do have a Patreon as well. It's patreon.com/Aravosis. You can find it via my link on TickTock. The link in my profile takes you to all of this stuff. But I appreciate if you guys would consider subscribing on the Patreon as well, because Patreon is simply a nice way to support people. You can give $5 a month or whatever it is, and it's just a nice way you can help out. And an added benefit, if you subscribe on my Patreon, you have to do the linkage, but you can link it to my Discord, and that makes you a VIP member of the Discord, which gives you access to the VIP auctions, which include things like the Russian airplane parts, the downed Russian fighter jet parts that I am auctioning off on the Discord right now. So see, lots of fun with Patreon. It's patreon.com/Aravosis. All right. Please keep the gifts up. Thank you. Thank you, Nathan. I was just saying, thank you, Nathan. Actually, I do like that hat. That hat is one of the, I think TickTock, you guys can't see this, but TickTock has this like brown hat and mustache thing that is done so well. It's done so well. So thank you for that, Nathan. But please do keep the gifts coming on TikTok and on YouTube. Ben has a question. Thank you, Ben. A super chat question on YouTube. Did Putin make his big announcement today? No, not according to the news right before I came on. He said, I heard a lot of talk about it, but I didn't see anything on the news. Did Putin cancel it? So Putin today was going to, somebody's saying they saw it. Putin today was supposed to announce, we thought, a new mobilization was all the talk. That, oh my God, he's going to announce a new draft. Thank you, Hazel. Oh, thank you very much, Hazel. I know that was extremely generous of you. Thank you for that. You can check out the Russian jet part, by the way, on my Discord, discord.aravosis.com. I will have a couple more auctions, but this auction is for the VIP members who are the paying members via Patreon. But I will do a private, public auction next that anybody can bid on. So anyway, all the pundits thought Putin was going to announce a new draft today, a new mobilization. I checked all the stories literally 5 minutes to 6 p.m. Eastern time tonight. Moscow has got to be 7-8 hours ahead of us. Hey, Google, what time is it in Moscow? (2:44 a.m.) That means 6 o'clock, 2 o'clock. That means 8 hours ahead. So it was already 2 a.m. in Moscow. Had Putin spoken, Putin would have already spoken by the time I checked the news. There was no news at all when I checked before coming on the show with you guys as to any update at all about anything Putin had said. So I'm not sure what's going on. I'm not sure. That was my Google. Oh, your Google answered? That's cute. Crystal saying her Google answered too. A little creepy, but cute. So we don't know. We don't know. Putin did speak, PJ is saying, but did we get any feedback on anything? Is there any kind of, because the news wasn't covering it. I did a specific search on Putin at about 5 to 6 and there was nothing. Anyway, so not yet. He seems to have a habit of doing this and I don't quite know why. Remember a couple months ago, I don't know if it was the parliament meeting or whatever it was, but they kept kind of having stuff that the Russians were going to say, and we were all like waiting, and then they kind of delayed it. So I don't know. In any case, I know he did. Yeah, he spoke about Leningrad. I know that because it was the anniversary of the siege of Leningrad, and I did see a video or pictures of Putin laying down wreaths for that. So there was that, but no idea. Anyway, so there you go, Ben. There's been no news on it, which means at least Nothing big was announced, it would seem. Not yet. But the thinking is that the Russians are going to announce, thank you, Kanausi, that the Russians, the Ukrainians keep saying, but others have been saying too, that the Russians may be announcing that they're going to be having basically expanding the military draft. But, we'll see. Okay, what else we got? Let me look here on TickTock. Remember, on TickTock, you can submit questions via the Q&A link in my profile on TickTock. One moment here. All right, Poppy's getting back to me on TickTock. That's an interesting question. Why didn't Russia invade Ukraine? What they mean here is all of Ukraine in 2014 when they took Crimea. I don't know. That's a really interesting question because they would have had a better time of it, clearly. I mean, at least as far as Ukraine, the Ukrainian military wasn't at all prepared back then. They were prepared this time, right? Last time, well, that's what I'm thinking. Kellum's saying they were testing the water, maybe. That's what I'm wondering is whether for Russia, the first time was a trial balloon. A trial balloon means basically you throw something out there. You're right. You throw something out there to test the waters, basically. So in other words, was Putin worried that the West might react, that the West might, thank you, Daniel, I'll put yours up in a second, that the West, might do exactly what we're doing right now if he invaded all the way? And did he invade partially and take Crimea just to see what happens? And what happened was, I think the West didn't do a hell of a lot in response. Now, having said that, clearly Ukraine wasn't prepared to fight back then. Well, actually, Kelly Fonce is making, that's a good point too. Kelly Fonce is making the point that the Russians were hoping to reinstate Yanukovych. Yanukovych was the Ukrainian leader who was overthrown by the people. And it's, so maybe the Russians, right, maybe from a Russian perspective, it was too obvious to go and invade the entire country. So I don't know, but it's an interesting question though, because in retrospect, at least, might have been a better move. Because we still would be having the same discussion. We'd still be afraid of Russia using nukes, but Russia would have been able to run over the Ukrainians, and they wouldn't have been nearly as well trained as they are now. Oops, it is not pinned on my end. Thank you for the gift there, Chef's Kiss. I do not have a comment that is pinned. Maybe there was one pinned. I lost it now. Sorry, guys. Ash, I don't know if you can pull it up again. Or if you guys want to tell me again what the pinned comment said. Sorry, just looking here. Putin is losing. That's cute, CFI. That's cute. Let me see here. This is a question I've had from the beginning, and I don't really know. Good question. Why are we so open about what we send to Ukraine? It seems like it would be a huge tactical disadvantage. For example, the delay on the Patriot missile. You would think, in general, you would think it's better to not say at all. Make the Russians, Britain sending tanks. Rather, it's better for Russia not to know at all if anyone is sending tanks and how many tanks are coming. For example, if Russia were to see, Russia would, Russia's got satellites that are looking very closely at every inch of Poland and like everything crossing the Ukrainian border. The Russians might see stuff that looks like tanks coming across, but thank you, Happy Beach family. always love that hat. The Russians might be able to see tanks coming across. Granted, they're probably boxed up or whatever, but they wouldn't know how many tanks. Even if they knew there were tanks, they would say, okay, our intelligence says that there's a shipment of English, British tanks coming across, but they'd say, how many? Well, now they know how many because we told them, right? I don't get it. I don't get it. And the other problem, and frankly, by the way, this is a problem Democrats had last year. Remember when Democrats kept negotiating publicly? Not even last year. I think it was a year and a half ago when Democrats were negotiating publicly with other Democrats about that infrastructure package. It was very U.S. politics here. But what was interesting is because it was public and Democrats kept fighting with each other and negotiating, and then they would throw something out and then the other party would back out. It made Democrats look weak because to the rest of the country, they looked and they said, these Democrats can't even get their act together. I worry about the same thing. I worry, for example, this issue with Germany and the US and this apparent battle between Germany and the US over whether we will send tanks, whether they'll send tanks. They want us to send our tanks with them. This kind of stuff. It only makes us look weaker to Russia. Thank you, Mully. I don't know. I wonder what it really is. I just don't. I mean, if you think your enemy is a bigger gun, you don't just run in. You stop and think, giving you time. My point is, I'm really, what's the word I'm looking for? I have a difficult time coming up with a theory as to why it is beneficial to tell the Russians what we're doing. It could be misinformation, which Klaus is saying on TikTok. It could be. It could be. Yeah. Anyway, hang on a second here. Let me see. Oops. I've got 3 super chats I got to catch up with. Okay, here we go. Daniel O'Neill. Thank you, Daniel. Saku Air Base and Kerch Bridge attacks were likely Attackums, according to some experts. Perhaps a friendly neighbor to the southwest. No Putin speech tonight. Bid in. Oh, good. I'm glad you bid. I wasn't. Callum. No, we don't. I mean, not Callum. We don't want to piss off. The only thing is I haven't. Daniel, I haven't decided yet. So far, I'm restricting it to Americans because I said I'm a little nervous about shipping things out of the country. We'll have to talk. Let's go talk about it on the Discord later. But I'm not quite sure if I can ship them, is my concern. So outside of the U.S., let's talk about that. If so, we can try to undo your bid somehow. I'm not sure how we do that. But we can talk about it. In any case, I saw a report a while ago, months ago, that they thought that Attackums, which are the longer, I think Attackums are what's the range? Aren't the Attackums the ones that can go 200 miles, 300 kilometers? That somebody had already provided them to Ukraine. I don't know. I mean, maybe they have, and maybe that's the misinformation, right? Maybe that's the misinformation or the disinformation. We've been claiming all along we're really afraid. 150 kilometers? Attackums? Okay, so if Attackums go 150 kilometers, that's going to be around 100 miles, I'm going to say, ish, which is still really good. Maybe, or 80 miles. I can ask Google again. I don't want to upset your guys' Google. Hey, Google, convert 150 kilometers to miles. 93 miles. Okay. I was right, around 100 miles. So it is possible. It is possible. Now, who do you think is doing it, Daniel? I mean, you're saying country to the southwest. Southwest, if it's not, everyone's giving lots of different miles here. Oh, Daniel's saying 300 kilometers. So that would be 200 miles. Okay. So Attackums are the ones we've been talking about wanting Ukraine to get. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, it's 200 miles or 300. Yeah. Do you think it's Romania? Or who do you think is getting who do you think is getting Romania? Daniel's saying, okay, interesting. Wow. I mean, God, it'd be great if it is. Thank you, Flower Lady. You are always generous with your mirror, your Lady of the Lake mirror every night. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. All right. Question number 2. Ben B. Smith is asking, if Putin gets overthrown, will a worse leader come? Maybe. And that's the concern. I always tell people this is one of the things you've got to be careful with. If you are overthrowing people, I mean, it sounds kind of funny, but it's something you learn in school, certainly graduate school, international affairs, is there's a lot of reasons why maybe we don't want to overthrow foreign leaders. I mean, you could get into moral or ethical or whatever, but there's also the practical strategic reason. The very point in overthrowing somebody or helping create a situation where they will be overthrown is you assume you will be better off if that other guy loses his job. But, and your Benji is saying the devil in this case, that's exactly it. We don't know Putin. We don't know who's coming next. Could the next guy be even worse? Yeah, right. Second problem, and this was a concern with Iraq, but it ended up not being as big a problem. The country can literally fall apart. I mean, Iraq did fall apart in many ways, but I'm talking literally fall apart. I remember at the time, one of the concerns was if we got rid of Saddam Hussein because he was a strong dictator, holding together disparate peoples who don't really belong together. The concern was, would the Kurds break off? And then what happens to the Kurds in Turkey, right? Do they rise up, right? So Turkey, a NATO ally, starts to have problems. Does Iran basically annex whether it's like northeastern Iraq or eastern Iraq? There was all sorts of, and then I don't know whether the issue was worrying about Syria or who, but there was a worry about the other third of Iraq too. So basically, if you don't know what's coming next in terms of the leader of the country, but also whether the country will hold together or have civil war or literally break into multiple countries, sometimes, and by the way, this is why many times in the past, America, but also other world powers ended up supporting dictators, because the dictator was the devil they knew. And the dictator was able to hold the country together. I mean, there's lots of other reasons too. The dictator would do things they wanted, in terms of foreign policy. But yeah, you've got to worry about who comes next. So sure, so I didn't mean to be glib by saying, sure, he could be worse, but he really could be worse. Yeah. He could be somebody, for example, it could be Prigozhin, who is the head of the Wagner mercenary group, who thinks that Putin's been too light, too easy, and the Russian Ministry of Defense isn't as cutthroat. He literally runs a group of murderous mercenaries. So we know what his approach would be. His approach would be 100 times worse than what Putin is doing in terms of going after civilians. Ben is asking, what would it mean if Putin declared war on Ukraine? What would Putin gain from doing it? The only thing I can see with that is there's an issue in Russia where I want to say is that the mobilized troops cannot be sent into war. There's two issues. There's two issues. One, can the troops be okay? There were two different issues here, or maybe it's just the same issue linked together. There's an issue with sending the troops basically to war outside of Russia unless it's been a declared war. So the special military operation, the mobilized troops, I believe, can't be sent out of Russia. Whereas, for example, now Russia has declared all of this to be Russia now, all this of Ukraine. So if Russia can now send mobilized troops, or the conscripts, can now be sent into here, and they're still in Russia, so it's not a problem. If he declared war, I believe then he wouldn't have any legal restrictions on where he sends the troops. I may be screwing this up a little bit, but I know the basic issue is where you can send the troops and whether they're inside Russia or outside of Russia. So you get away with that. The other thing is, as somebody just said on TikTok, who was that? Klaus is just saying on TikTok, is, a war economy. I don't know exactly how the law works in Russia with regards to this, but I'm assuming if war is declared, there are probably all sorts of other legal powers that Putin is given in terms of economic powers, right? And being able to, whether you're nationalizing industries. I mean, the U.S. even has this to some degree. We've got, I forget what it's called, but we were using it during COVID, that in sort of an emergencies, the president can not really nationalize industries, but they can tell industries, you've been making paper, you're now going to make syringes or whatever. But, you could basically direct companies to have to produce for the government. It's not the War Powers Act. It's something else, because the War Powers Act was this whole issue of whether we go to war or not. It's defense procurement, something like that. Yeah. In any case. But that's the issue. There is, at least from what I know, it's the war economy, but it also is this crazy Defense Production Act. That's it. That's what it's called. Thank you. I knew it was called something. That's from Ethan Travis and B. Smith. Thank you, guys. But yeah, I kept hearing it was because of him not being able to use the troops outside of Russia unless they're at war. But I'm guessing, like we said, it's Russia. There have got to be a lot of other powers that you get, would be my guess. Let me go look at TikTok again. Oh, it's 7:00 already. We can go. I'll go another couple minutes and then we'll call it quits here. Let me see here. Oops. Has Germany replaced their Secretary of Defense yet? Yes. The new Secretary, Boris Pistorius. I don't know why I remember that name. He just started yesterday. Yep. So there is a new Secretary of Defense now in Germany. All right. I don't know. I don't see. I mean, I can't get to every question anyway. But let me just look here. Another issue is if you declare war, is you have to intern foreign nationals. Well, you don't have to, I guess, right? But I mean, certainly it would be kind of any Americans that are there. It's a problem. Or well, I guess Americans, we're not necessarily going to be at war. I am in DC. Correct. Oops. Not overthrowing an autocratic government, but engaging with it for selfish ends is so dangerous and hypocrisy of the highest order. Yeah. The only thing is, as I said, what comes next? I mean, I will say this. There's a lot of people who don't like the U.S. overthrowing governments. And there's a lot of people, I say the U.S., it could be anybody. There's a lot of people who don't like the U.S. cozying up to autocratic governments, basically dictators or let's just say bad governments. And there's kind of a weird situation of like, which one is it? You know what I mean? Because you can't really be neutral, right? Either you trade and have normal relations with a bad government, or you cut the bad government off. You do embargoes. I mean, South Africa, which I agree with what we did with South Africa, but South Africa, trade embargoes and everything else, basically trying to get the government overthrown in essence. But at the same time, people don't like us when we try to overthrow governments, and it can be risky overthrowing governments. Anyway, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's not just an esoteric question, obviously, because it is a real world question. I am sympathetic to the moral and ethical arguments, but I'm also sympathetic to the practical arguments, because one of the things that always drives me nuts in politics is, and it's not just with foreign policy, but domestic policy too, is people who want you to do something because, it's the right thing to do. And it doesn't matter if we win or not. And I'm like, well, no, I want, if we're, for example, trying to pass legislation to do something good in the US, I don't want us to let's just try to pass anything. Thank you, Benji, even though we know we'll lose. And I'm like, well, what's the point if we know we'll lose? Tell me why it helps us trying to pass legislation and losing. Does that set us up for next time, or does it make it even worse? Because if you lose, then it starts to convince people that the legislation isn't popular. But my point is, you should generally be making decisions in any kind of government policy that achieve some goal or make your country better off. And I'm all for being moral and ethical, but that can't be enough, because otherwise, we'd be cutting off half the world. And does that necessarily, the Soviets? I mean, we did find a way of working with the Soviets in World War II. I mean, Otanbot is saying the Wagner mercenary group, Russian mercenary group member who fled to Norway, has memory sticks containing recordings of the alleged murders of fellow soldiers. His lawyer has stated that he was surprised by the scale of violence in the group. Surprised by the scale of violence. I mean, give me a break. Everybody knew these guys were murderers, but still, that was a point I was raising the other day. This guy, he's a Russian mercenary, which are basically private army, murderous people, this private army. And he defected to Norway and claimed that he knew, at least, thank you, Mark, for the hat there. He knew at least of crimes that they had committed and things like this, war crimes. What I was wondering was whether he brought proof with him. And what Otanbot is saying is that he's now claiming he brought proof, that he brought recordings, which would be pretty wild if he did. That would be awesome if he did that. But, according to the Norwegian paper, very interesting. All right, let me do a quick summary of the topics we talked about today, and then, and then I will go over to the. We've had lots of helicopters flying over in the last 2 days, and the thing is, I'm convinced they're Biden's helicopters, because we've had 3 or 4, and 3 helicopters is always the president. I mean, it's always the president. And we had 4 today, which is even weirder because you do not have 4 helicopters fly over. This is Washington, D.C. The airspace is really, really controlled. But like I said, we had 4 helicopters today, and I was like, what the hell was that? Very interesting. Let me do the quick summary of the news we talked about today, and then then I'll go to the Discord for a little bit, and then you and I can talk Irish boy to make sure we didn't screw things up. All right. Per the Wall Street Journal, Germany will not allow the Allies to ship German-made tanks to Ukraine unless the U.S. ships Abrams tanks to Ukraine as well. I then talked about some quotes that German Chancellor Scholz had given at Davos. One of them was very good, the other not so good. The U.S. New York Times reports that the U.S. is warming to the idea that that basically the Ukrainians may end up needing to attack Crimea. Up until now, the U.S. has been worried about it. We're worried about the Russians looking at that as a bridge too far, and the U.S. is starting to believe that unless the Ukrainians go after Crimea, the Russians aren't willing to negotiate. Thank you, Azamak. Meaning the Russians think they've got this war down, no problem. Galloway, he's a nut job. Why did that come up? The Michael Clarke. Then I talked about the spring offensive, and basically that there's been a lot of discussion now about having either the Ukrainians or the Russians or both are going to launch some big attacks come this spring, probably end of March, early April, and they could be decisive. CNN is reporting that the U.S. is ready to announce one of its largest military aid packages. Thank you, Arabella, for the gift there. The CAP packages are not expected to include Abrams tanks. There was a horrific Ukrainian helicopter crash outside of Kyiv today that killed 14 people, including a child, and Ukraine's interior ministry. At this point, at least, they are not saying that it looks like foul play, not yet. Russia's foreign minister compared the U.S. to Hitler and said the U.S. has a final solution to the Russia question, which is insane, but that's Russia. And Latvia, two things. Latvia announced new military aid for Ukraine, including Stinger missiles and helicopters and machine guns. And Canada is sending, I forgot to mention, Canada is sending 200 armored personnel carriers to Ukraine. And per Admiral Stavridis, who was the former U.S. NATO allied commander, he called this a significant pledge. He said it was basically, he thought this was a big deal, what the Ukrainians were doing. So that's good. 200 armored personnel carriers. So there you go, guys. I will go over to the Discord. As we said, we've got a cool new auction, which at this point, I was keeping it just to Americans, but we'll see. Thank you, Kanausi, where I am auctioning off some parts to a Russian fighter jet that the Ukrainians shot down in August, which is very cool. So head over to the Discord, discord.aravosis.com. You can find it on TickTock. Just go to my profile, click the link, the Linktree link, and one of those will have my Discord. The rest of you can just go to, like I said, discord.aravosis.com or aravosis.com for my links overall. And thank you, guys. This has been fun, as always. It's a little after 7 now. I will be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Thanks for joining us. We'll be talking more about the latest news from Ukraine then. And thank you for the gifts. And finally, as always, thank you for doing the stopping the trolls. Because at least from what I was hearing, it's been kind of crazy. So been very interesting. I saw you guys saying they were out of control today. Russians don't like us. What can I say? All right. I will talk to you guys later. Bye, Denmark. Bye, everybody else. And go to the Discord. We'll go hang out in a while. Once you get to the Discord, you still have to click the read me and click the OK button and everything. But then we'll be in the video chat section, I think it's called, or audio chat or something. And you'll see John's after party. Just scroll down. You'll see it. John's after party towards the bottom. All right, guys. See you over to the Discord and see you tomorrow.